City Talks with Reuben Abati.
On your number one lifestyle station, City 1051 FM. On this show, we talk about stories of political and human interest that affect us as citizens of Nigeria and as members of a global human community. Today, we'll be discussing Nigeria's economic outlook, the way forward. And to guide us through this, we have a special guest, and he's Dr. Ayo Teriba, an economist and an academic. Dr. Teriba is a Chief Executive Officer of Economic Associates, EA, where he provides strategic direction for ongoing research and consulting on the outlook of the Nigerian economy, focusing on global, continental, national, subnational, and sectoral issues. He teaches economics of globalization on the postgraduate Nigerian Scholars Program at the Nigerian University of Technology and Management in Lagos. He is the coordinator of the Technical Working Group on Financial Sector and Capital Markets on National Development Plans 2021 to 2025 and 2036 to 2030 and Nigeria Agenda 2050. He is the Vice Chairman of the Technical Committee of the National Council on Privatization, aligning privatization programs with the macroeconomy. He was a member of the Board of Economic Advisors in the Office of the Economic Advisor to the Vice President, contributing to the conception of economic policy ideas for the country. He was also a member of Presidential Technical Advisory Committee on implementation of the new national minimum wage. He was also a member of the defunct National Economic Intelligence Committee, NEIC, where he conducted periodic reality checks on macroeconomic, fiscal, and monetary policies. Before becoming CEO of EA in 2004, Dr. Teriba was chief economist at This Day newspaper, 2001 to 2004, faculty member at Lagos Business School, 1995 to 2001, head of research at Lagos Chamber of Commerce, 1993 to 1995, company economist at UAC of Nigeria, 1992 to 1993. He has also served as consultant to many blue-chip companies, federal ministries, departments, and agencies, state governments, DFID, GIZ, USAID, UNDP, UNIDO, World Bank, and was a visiting scholar to the IMF Research Department in Washington, D.C. Dr. Teriba and BSc economist from the University of Ibadan, as winner of the Sir James Robertson Prize and the Medal UAC Prize in Economics and the Economics Departmental Prize as all-round best economics graduate in 1988. He also holds an MSc economist from the University of Ibadan in 1990, MPhil Economics of Developing Countries as a Cambridge DFID scholar at the University of Cambridge in 1992, and a PhD in Applied Econometrics and Monetary Economics from University of Durham in 2003. He's an alumnus of Lagos Business School AMP5 and Henley Business School BDP executive programs. If you want to be part of this conversation, you can call us on 0700 1051 1051, or you leave comments on WhatsApp 090 991 64403, and on our social media accounts at City1051 on Zoom and Facebook. Dr. Ayo Teriba, thank you very much for joining us, and welcome to today's edition of City Talks with Reuben Abati.
Thank you very much, Ruby.
Yes, thank you.
It's my pleasure.
Yes, Thank you for joining us on the program. Well, this week, there was this virtual meeting between officials of the IMF and the Nigerian officials, and there was also an event organized in collaboration with the World Bank on the Nigerian economic update with the sub-theme resilience through reforms. And in both instances, the IMF was talking about, yes, the GDP of Nigeria, GDP recovering, but unemployment and inflation remaining elevated. There was also the projection that, yes, GDP growth has been positive since Q4 2020. It increased 0.5% year on year in Q1 2021, supported by improvements in the agri and service sectors. But inflation still stands as at May at 17.9%. Both the IMF and the World Bank are saying that yes, Nigeria could recover more if we're able to sustain reforms in critical sectors of the economy and address issues of rising inflation, job opportunities, and also insecurity. And if we're able to do that, we could have a GDP growth of 1.8%. And if not, we could end up at the level of just 1.1% GDP growth by the end of this year. But the reforms that they are talking about, the sustainable reforms that these Bretton Woods institutions are talking about, what are those critical areas in your view where we need to ensure reform?
Thank you very much. I attended the meeting hosted by the World Bank on the development update on Nigeria. I did not attend the virtual meeting of the IMF. So I'm familiar with the sort of issues that the World Bank put on the table. And I have to caution that, like much of the discussion out there about the economy, there's too much talk about symptoms, and there is very little effort to try and get a convincing diagnosis. So you get a lot of talk about body temperature, which is what you are dealing with when you are discussing inflation, about headaches, about growth. And these are all very superficial issues. And you have to understand that economics is less about the ends that you want to achieve. It's more about the means with which you wish to achieve them. So I see no discussion of what means should be deployed to bring desirable ends about. I see a lot of, endless listing of the ends that we like to achieve that are elusive, that are eluding us. And I see no discussion whatsoever about the means that you should deploy to achieve it. I came off with that impression from the World Bank event. They were talking about the exchange rate, about multiple windows. They were talking about inflation. They were talking about GDP growth, all of which are purely superficial issues. You are not going to be able to solve exchange rate problem or inflation problem or growth problem just by talking about exchange rate and inflation. So it's like a patient presenting himself or herself in the hospital. The nurse, the lowest medical staff can talk about symptoms, but you require more competent personnel to talk about the diagnosis and to talk about the prescription. So I do think we should try and get the Nigerian conversation beneath the surface and speak to ourselves about what does Nigeria need to do to end the negative narratives that we've come to find ourselves in. Reuben.
I get your point, but one of the things that the World Bank meeting threw up was the need for policy consensus in terms of exchange rate management, monetary policy, trade policy, fiscal policy, and social protection. In fact, the country director used the phrase elite consensus. And I guess that has to do with, the political will, the system of governance, how we address and prioritize issues and policies. Will you consider that particular point, an end in itself rather than a means to an end? Or will you say, asking for
the
consensus?
Conversation.
Yes. Will you say
I was a part of it.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I was there. I had the entire presentation and I listened to the panel discussion that followed. And I will still maintain that much of the discussion amounted to very superficial policy postulations. I had issues about Nigeria's revenue probably being the lowest in the world. That came out from the presentation. And if your revenues are the lowest, your spending are also likely to be among the lowest. I had issues about the deficits and the debt problem. The recommendations made by the World Bank about resolving the revenue crisis was to look to increase tax revenue, which I think is not appropriate in the Nigerian context. Government revenue has been blighted by the pandemic, by recession, by the economic dislocations, devaluation. So itself, government revenue itself is an end, not a means. Now, to suggest that government should raise tax revenue in a context in which companies who will pay the tax are no less affected than the government. What blighted government revenue has blighted corporate profits. What blighted government revenue has blighted personal income. So where is that increased tax going to come from in an economy that is in a recession, in an economy that has suffered 2 recessions in 4 years, has never really, in per capita terms, has not been out of recession in 5 years, and you say raise taxes? And I wonder, so it's not about telling Nigeria to raise taxes. It's about looking more fundamentally at the fiscal situation. I've read IMF research, I've read World Bank research that made sensible recommendations to countries. I'll quote an IMF research that they've been working on over the last 3-4 years on the wealth of nations. And they categorically stated that it is not only about what the government owes, it is about what the government owns. That many governments don't know what they own, but the whole world knows what they owe. And the Nigerian government is a prime example of that, in which all we get to hear about is how deficits are high, how debts are building up, and we never get to have any conversation about what does the government own. Do we know what Nigeria owns? Do we know what Nigeria owns are worth? And what difference can they make to the low revenue situation? So rather than saying we should be chasing elusive tax increases, we've been chasing tax increases for as long as I can remember. But it never increases, it keeps declining. Well, so it's a question, the distinction that I think, similar to the decision I've made between means and ends. We also now need, in the context of government policy, in the context of public finance and monetary policy, to make a distinction between income statement and the balance sheet. Income statement is where you talk about your revenue, your spending, your deficits. The balance sheet is where the assets that you are going to make revenue from are. That's where equity that you can raise against your assets sit. And if you are going to improve the quality of your debt by linking debt, issuing asset-linked debt, which is more sustainable. So it's about time Nigeria turns to the balance sheet and now try to recouple the income statement with the balance sheet. The income statement is drying up. Oil, that used to be the main supplier of revenue on our income statement, has a very bleak future. But that revenue from oil came from an asset from our balance sheet.
Well, Dr. Teriba,
there are more assets on that balance sheet. And it's time for Nigeria to shift to that balance sheet to see which more assets can bring revenue. Yes, Reuben, I would like to.
Dr. Teriba, for the benefit of our listeners, who may not understand these economic terms, when you talk about taxation, do you put under that category the recommendation by the World Bank, particularly, and even the IMF, that the Nigerian government will need to remove petroleum subsidy, and that Nigeria will have to introduce a regime in the electricity sector of cost-reflective and service-reflective tariffs, and that beyond all of that also, any kind of subsidy, is unacceptable?
Reuben, let's be careful. The IMF and the World Bank are headquartered in Washington, D.C. The American government has injected trillions of US dollars to subsidize income that had been harmed by the lockdown. The latest was $1.9 trillion injected. So how can anybody in the aftermath of a lockdown begin to talk about withdraw subsidy? We've seen 1 year in which governments around the world have revved up subsidies, income subsidies. You can't go to work, you can't earn income. They've been distributing checks. And you now stand up and say, Nigeria should remove. Even if you want to argue that anybody should remove subsidies, it's a political decision what any government subsidizes. As long as the world lasts, governments will keep subsidizing. So I don't think that economists should be, dabbling into what political decisions government make with the resources they have. I do think what economists should prescribe is where government will find the resources. Nigeria has about 100 million people who are below the poverty line. So even if you take off subsidy from any item that you may say, take off the subsidy from, a sure way of taking people out of poverty is to distribute the cash to them. It will be subsidy. I don't want us to be wasting our time. The whole world at the moment is subsidizing their populace out of the pandemic and out of the crisis of the lockdown and trying to get the economy to rise again. Let's debate where Nigeria will find the money. It's not the doctor's business to tell you what to do with your energy. If you report at the hospital and you are ill, the doctor's business is to fix your illness. He can't prescribe to you when you go home, don't do this, don't do that. So let's talk as economists. Our business is not the politics of what governments do for their people, whether it's subsidies or about taxes, is where Nigeria will find revenue. And I do think Nigeria's chances of mobilizing revenue has never been as good as it is at the moment. And we should point the way to so many of Nigeria's assets are idle. Okay. Nigeria can turn to those assets and get new revenue streams from the assets.
Okay, I think it would be nice if you can help us identify some of those assets. I brought up the issue of subsidy. It's not just IMF and World Bank talking about removal of subsidy. Even the Minister of State for Petroleum Resources, Chief Timi Presiva, has been quoted as saying, yes, the Nigerian government will not remove petroleum subsidy in June, but that Nigerians should realize that the subsidy that is provided under under recovery plans of the NNPC is over 100 billion naira per month, and that if we were to have appropriate pricing of petrol, Nigerians may be paying close to about 385 naira per liter. The NNPC has also said that, look, the situation is really not in the best interest of Nigeria. Now, talking about revenue, the Group Managing Director of NNPC, Mele Kyari, was quoted just this week saying that, yes, oil prices are going up, $70, $75 per barrel, per liter, and that it could reach up to about $100 before the end of the year, and that is not in Nigeria's best interest. Now, we'll get revenue from there if oil prices keep going up, but the GMD of NNPC says no, we don't need oil to be higher than $58 or $60. What do you say to that?
Well, the conversation about the oil price, yes, the oil price is now higher than it was last year. But the forecasts that I've seen, the World Bank still forecasts the figure you mentioned, about $56, $58, as the average price that we will see in 2021. So the fact that it's above 70 today does not mean that the year average for 2021 is going to be 70. It's not going to be 70. It's more likely to be less than 60. And the future of oil is bleak. And the fact that the oil price is 70 is not good news for Nigeria, because increasingly it's not about your export revenue that matters. It's about your own value added in that export revenue. Nigeria's value added in oil export revenue is 100%. We rely very heavily on foreign inputs to produce the oil. And it's the earlier Nigeria begins to think, of what it can add value to, regardless of whether it's produced here in Nigeria or produced anywhere else in the world, the better for Nigeria. So the world is not about value added, regardless of which country that value is added. So values added by Nigerians is what should matter to Nigeria. Don't get me wrong about subsidy removal. I am for complete deregulation of the price of petroleum products. However, that does not shut the conversation about subsidy. The most sensible subsidy to give is to distribute coupons to the most vulnerable Nigerians. So let the refined products sell at market prices all over Nigeria, and target assistance, target subsidies directly to the purses of the poor who you wish, to subsidize their access to. That will be the most efficient, way to administer that subsidy. Subsidies you will always have to administer, but whether you should be subsidizing the price of anything, I think is wrong. I think we should concentrate more on income subsidy. That will reduce poverty, and it will also enable prices to allocate those resources more efficiently. What does Nigeria have that Nigeria can generate revenue from? It's a lot. And I put this in the following. Usually, countries have the following categories of assets. You have corporate assets, which are the companies you own. You have physical assets, which are the lands and built structures that you own. You have intangible assets, which are examples will help when we license GSM companies and they paid millions of dollars to buy the licenses. We weren't selling anything physical to them. We sold intangible rights to come into the market and build networks and generate revenue. So we have endless number of other sectors that we could liberalize and attract foreign investment into the spaces. Then the fourth category, in addition to corporate assets, physical assets, and intangible assets, are human assets. And I begin with corporate assets. I am not aware of any company that the Nigerian government owns that is listed in any stock market anywhere in the world. The way that hurts, including the LNG, is that the companies are just corporate assets. They are not financial assets. And the way Saudi Arabia got around it was to go and list Aramco on the stock exchange. And from a company whose value was not known to a company that is worth 2 trillion hitting Saudi Arabia's balance sheet. It's a different fiscal situation. So Nigerian government is encouraged to list its companies, LNG, all the state-owned assets that it owns in the oil sector or any sector. Let the values be known so that as we are discussing the value of your debt, we also know the value of your corporate assets. And wherever the value of the corporate assets are high enough, you can securitize them and raise liquidity for the government rather than telling the government to go and tax those people whose income and profits has been ruined by recession. Your physical assets, lands and buildings. The best example is that of the United States, who created government real estate portfolio and liberalized the space the way we did to our pension sector. So they licensed auctioneers, they licensed developers and facility managers. And in the process have been unlocking liquidity, from the government's real estate portfolio. Nigerian government is rich in real estate. Much of them are idle. NIPOST has 2,000-3,000 premises around the country. The police, the barracks that the Ministry of Defense sits on, the prisons, are potentially valuable assets that are idle, and undervalued. So Nigeria will begin to look like India or China because those countries unlock significant amount of resources from their real estate and they use it to fund the government. And when you open up real estate the way you open the pension sector, you also create financial transactions that could turn places in Nigeria to global financial centers. The way Dubai, a desert, used real estate, to turn that desert into a global financial center. Nigeria needs liquidity, and the only thing the world has to offer any country now is surplus liquidity. So you have to look for ways of attracting global liquidity into idle national assets. I'll pause on those examples there while the conversation continues.
Well, two things. Earlier on, you talked about adding value in response to the questioners had raised about the spot price of crude oil. Now, that value addition, will it include ensuring that Nigeria does not continue to import 100% of fuel, finished products for local consumption? And then now you've talked about assets and how you can use all of that, turn it into a surplus liquidity. How about the challenges of transparency and accountability? Big problem for Nigeria. Would that just disappear once the revenue improves?
Okay, there's no better way to achieve transparency and accountability than to approach the market. The market, the level of disclosure that the market requires, you can't compare it to the opacity that you have when the enterprise is government owned. Perhaps one reason why the market raising equity is not popular with Nigerian state-owned companies is that for you to raise equity, you have to be transparent. But for you to raise debt, there's no question of transparency as long as you can, provide collateral, for the debt you are trying to raise. So a situation in which the only item on the Nigerian government's balance sheet that is active is debt is not good. Let the Nigerian government begin to attract equity. You and I won't have to tell them to be transparent, because the only way that the market will welcome you is by you being transparent and by you being accountable. The conversation about refining Nigeria's crude, to save the money, that we waste on, importing refined products. We export crude, or we import refined products. My suggestion, well, you already have conversation recently about government's, intention to buy into the refinery that will come on stream in the next year or two. But we have our own refineries there that do not work. We recently have also read in the news that we want to inject $1.5 billion into it, presumably borrowed $1.5 billion. Now, the question is, that refinery that you want to inject $1.5 billion into, what is it worth? A sensible thing to do is first to establish its valuation before you borrow money and inject into it. And it would have been best if upon valuing it, you then list it on the market and let those who are willing, to come and invest in it, come and buy, shares in it, and then invest their own money. Liberalizing the space, for private investors will be the ultimate answer, to making sure that the refinery takes place, in the refining takes place in Nigeria. However, the thing about attracting investment, if you look at the countries that have succeeded in doing so over the past 3 decades, and that will include India, Brazil, is until the government wants the money, you will not make much progress. The moment the government knows that the money is real, I do think that they will do the necessary institutional reforms, that will enable them to institute, transparency and get the money. Brazil in 2016 created the partnership, private partnership for investments. It's online. It's a live platform. Every investment opportunity in Brazil you can now access on one website. You don't have to travel to Brazil. Whether there's lockdown or there's no lockdown, you can invest. And they are raking in a lot. I mean, the recent peak was 70 billion in 1 year, 2019, from FDI. India is doing the same. Right now, India has been battling crisis with its COVID management. But you go and look at the Invest India platform. Investment keeps rolling in. They don't have to visit foreign investors. Foreign investors don't have to visit them. Everything is online. And all investment opportunities in India are listed in that one site, regardless of which MDA is sponsoring it, regardless of which state is sponsoring it. Even private sector investors are there, investments are there. And they too are they were reported, like China, to have recorded increased FDI last year in the face of the lockdown. They were the 2 countries, notably, to have done so. Most other countries, FDI declined because of the lockdown, but in China and in India, it's increased because they've created dynamic online platforms for attracting investment. This is what Nigeria should be trying to do. We have a lot of fundable projects that are not funded. We cannot continue like this. If we didn't fund the oil investments in the 60s, we wouldn't have had the oil revenue that we are relied on for so long. It's about time to try and look at the other resources that we own, including real estate, including corporates, and try and fund them with global capital. The key to adding value is to do more about your human assets, to invest more in the skills of your populace, to equip them, with digital literacy. The countries that are gaining the most from their human capital management, again, includes China, India. India earns 880 billion from remittances, most recently. China, 70 billion. That's the kind of returns you get from your human capital, apart from their, net income that they earn from all over the world. You have Chinese here, running restaurants, running Chinatown. You have Indians running chain stores, That is all evidence of the investment of their governments in their populace to be able to go about around the world and earn money that benefits their country.
Well, another issue I would like to discuss with you, two more before we open up the lines for people to make contributions. The National Bureau of Statistics has been reporting a deceleration of inflation in Nigeria. In April, in May, the latest figures this week also show a deceleration, even if inflation is still as high as 17.93%. Now, I ask you, is inflation actually declining in Nigeria, considering the fact that, people report a certain disconnect between these statistics that we keep getting and the reality in the markets, particularly with regard to food inflation?
Right. You have to be careful what you make of monthly inflation figures. Most economic variables don't remain a straight line. They tend to oscillate. It's up a bit this month, down next month, up again the month after. And you cannot interpret single points. You have to establish a trend. You cannot say because the latest inflation figure is lower than the last one. No, there's nothing happening to inflation. There are random errors that could explain why 1 month will be low, but you should look at the trend across months. Minimum, you should be looking at 3 months trend, before you try to interpret it as whether inflation is increasing or is reducing. In the trend is the news. The oscillation around the trend is the noise. And I will warn you that inflation in Nigeria is largely cost push. If you've had recent episodes of devaluation, then inflation spiking is no news. The devaluation tells you that there will be pass-through from the exchange rate to inflation. So if you have treated the devaluation as the news, what happens to inflation thereafter is non-news. And you know that since last year, we've had bouts of devaluation. And you ask the question, which exchange rate? I do think that the exchange rate that the average Nigerian faces is the below the change exchange rate. It's official because central bank licensed the below the change. So that below the change exchange rate, the premium it has offered over the central bank's alternate reality, has been as large as 100 naira. So when you see the below the change exchange rate lose value, you expect that that's going to impact inflation. Eventually, the central bank would typically converge towards the below the change rate. It is unlikely, that the below the change rate will convert towards the central bank rate. So if you have situation in which the central bank rate is converging towards the below the change rate, the premium is narrowing. Often that also leads to moderation of the inflation. So the loss of value at the below the change spikes inflation, and eventual convergence moderates it. But again, I warn very strongly that discussing exchange rate, discussing inflation is a waste of Nigeria's time. You are treating symptoms rather than the root causes. What Nigeria should be discussing is the exchange rate is the price of forex. Is how to boost the supply of forex. Is how to increase our foreign reserve threshold to a level that supply will meet demand, if not exceed demand. That is the only time that the exchange rate will be stable. And the conversations we've had earlier about Nigeria needing to turn to assets, to connect local assets to global liquidity, to raise liquidity, especially foreign exchange liquidity, is the ultimate answer to the exchange rate problem.
Well,
so trying to count the number of windows is a waste of time.
Well,
but trying to get the liquidity to close the gap between all the different rates is the best step forward.
Well, on that note, I mean, you recall that this week, Wednesday, Thursday, there was some excitement about the Naira strengthening against the dollar in the parallel market. And we were told that the reason that was the case was that the CBN, Central Bank, had pumped Forex into the retail end of the market. But the question is, will this be sustained? Is it sustainable? Because we had similar measures in the past.
Look for a pattern. Look for a pattern. It happened Wednesday, Thursday. Is it going to happen from week to week, from month to month, before you then know that you have news? Until then, it may be noise.
Okay. Well, very quickly before we open up the lines to take contributions, you have an event sometime Thursday next week, looking at the Nigeria economic outlook across, different levels: global outlook, national outlook, subnational outlook, sectoral outlook. What is that, event all about?
Well, it's a periodic event that gives, decision makers the opportunity to exercise vigilance about what's happening in the environment of their decision making, the global environment, the national environment, the subnational environment, and the sectoral environment. We do it quarterly, but since March last year, given the lockdown, we had not been able to do it. This is the first time post-lockdown that we got a chance of doing it. So we always like to be sure that to ensure that the different context of strategy, for some global context, matters. But for all of us, more things are being determined at the global level today than at the national level or at the sectoral level or at the subnational level. But there are also significant opportunities that we can seize at the national level. We've discussed some of that. At the state level, the states also have a lot of independent actions that they can take to unlock the resources to make their states better places. Whereas the federal government has to deal with macro level issues, talked about income statement and balance sheet. The states are closer to the meso level issues. For example, there's no state that doesn't have cities and city centers. In most countries around the world, city centers are wealth-making centers. But you look around Nigerian states, you are no safer on a co-bridge or in a Dumata than you are in the forests. The threats, the risks, the security risks, they could steal your car, your wares, could snatch your phone at mile 12 of Oshodi in daylight. So we have failed, to try and preserve the abilities of those city centers to add value. And most states, if they just concentrate on the city center as a typical, city, in developed parts of the world would do, secure it, and make it a wealth creation center, they will generate a lot of revenue from it. So there are place-based opportunities for states to unlock revenue. There are product-based opportunities. Each state has one product or the other. It could be agricultural, it could be commercial, it could be tourist, that they are good at. How much is the state, supporting that product value chain, to unlock resources from it? There are people-based strategy. States are closer to people than the federal government. This human capital development, skill enhancement. How many states are doing as much for their people as Philippines is doing for the maids that they train and support to go into the diaspora, or the nurses or the sailors that Philippines train? So states have independent value that they can bring to the table. It's not just waiting for Abuja, and also in sectors, the techno-economic challenges facing the sectors. Yes, businesses are adopting technology, but until the society adopts them, until the government adopts it, businesses, by and large, only adopt those technologies in there. So we try to make sure, that all the, strategic skills are covered. It's Thursday at the Lagos Continental Hotel. It's Nigeria's economic outlook. Thank you, Reuben.
Yeah, well, on that note, we would like to take comments, interventions from our listeners. And if you want to be part of this conversation, you can call us on 0700-1051-1051. You can also leave comments on WhatsApp 090-991-64403, and on our social media accounts at City1051 on Zoom and Facebook. Do we have any callers on the line? Dr. Teriba here has been addressing a number of issues. Yes. Please, your name and your location. Yes. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Dr. Reuben Abati. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Calling from Norway this afternoon. Dr. Teriba, good afternoon, sir. I am happy.
Good afternoon.
I'm happy you brought him because I already anticipated a topic like this because of events during the week. And I want to ask him, just like I said last week, Nigeria problem economically, like he said, are being driven by foreign exchange, the inflation and whatever. Now, you have proposed more solutions from getting out of this problem. You talk about the corporate resources, like, for instance, the country having assets that can generate more forex, which of course will be okay. And now I want to take you back to the 1966-1967 time, when the Civil War started. I remember Babawolowo at the point was the finance commissioner to General Gowon, who was head of state then. And during that war, Babawolowo never borrowed a dime from anybody. There was pressure from the Bretton Woods institutions for Nigeria to devalue. Babawolowo never devalued their money. Yes, there were a lot of developmental projects going on, and Nigeria was able to get that sustainability, even when there was no oil boom before the early 70s. I now want to again marry that with what is happening today. We have had, because that NEPA before was a corporate asset, the NEPA is gone. How much did Nigeria make for it? United is gone. Federal Airport Authority fund is gone. All of this, if properly managed, would have as well sustained the economy of Nigeria. But because I want to really tackle, I want to interrogate further your suggestions. Now, if you have all of this, have you considered the political economy of Nigeria? Because all these solutions without really considering the Nigerian politics, for instance, political proximity, people from the north, people from the south, people from wherever, you want to get all of this for your people and not even looking at the overall national goal. So I think we have a lot of problems. And for me, finally, before I go, because I have a lot to say, honestly, I anticipated this topic, and I want to ask you now, the Central Bank of Nigeria for rice, the Federal Bank of Nigeria for other things, how can the Central Bank of Nigeria be a financial institution, just like a financial supermarket, throwing money at problems, not really solving those problems? What can they really do to really face the fiscal, the fiscal aspect of the economy, not like the policy you have talked about? Then, instead of just going into any other, at the end of the day, there's no autonomy. They have autonomy Nobody is really monitoring them. So today, how much is the dollar? Dollar from between 19 and 2015 and now, dollar has lost about 150%. It's about 150 inflation now, but average of 25% per annum.
Well, Dr. Teriba, over to you. We need to manage time. Thank you very much for calling in.
Yeah, not much of. I didn't hear much of the questions. The audio wasn't very.
No, he was talking about.
If you want to echo it,
he said all the recommendations you have made. Have you thought of the political economy of Nigeria? How politics can affect, economic processes? And that, secondly, what do you think that? Do you think that the CBN is doing the right thing by becoming the financial supermarket, throwing money in every direction without necessarily solving problems?
Okay, well, two things. The political economy of Nigeria. Well, you did use the word elite consensus when you were describing the conversation at the World Bank Forum. If the elite paints a clear enough vision of the benefits of Nigeria attracting surplus global liquidity into idle local assets, then it will be easy for the political class to muster the will to make it happen. You don't need 5 years or 6 years to solve Nigeria's problems. If you embrace some of these ideas, you will see a huge difference in 6 months. India has traveled that route from being a socialist. China has traveled that route from being a communist. Brazil has traveled that route. Mexico. Country after country have set their gaze on global liquidity and presented local assets that could attract that global liquidity. And the more liquidity you earn, the more political harmony you have at home. So you can try and ask yourself, what does Brazil, Mexico, China, and India have in common? They have different cultural backgrounds. They have different ideological leanings, but they are all agreed on the need to attract substantial amounts of global surplus liquidity into their countries, and they are succeeding. And I don't see any better way of any country succeeding. They used to attract liquidity, the FDI of the size that Nigeria attracts, 1 billion, 3 billion. India got 168 billion in 2020 in the face of the lockdown, overtaking the China, overtaking the United States for the first time. So what's the political economy? If it's good for us, the politicians should find the will to deliver it. Like the politicians in India, China, Brazil have found the will to do it. Whether the central bank should be all over the place throwing money around, it's also a conversation that has to be undertaken in our policy circles. The central bank is overstepping its bounds, is duplicating efforts that should be, expended by other MDAs of government. You are the banker to everyone. You are the banker to all agencies of government. You don't have to hijack their role. You don't have to be, relating directly with farmers as a central bank. It paints a picture of anarchy. So you should let the Ministry of Agriculture engage farmers, and you can fund them. They have their accounts with the central bank, and you should let the most appropriate ministries, fund building of factories and the rest of it. So I agree with you, that it's the way the central bank is carrying on, it's not sustainable.
Well, we have another caller on the line. Please keep the question or comment brief.
Good afternoon, Dr. Reuben.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for joining us.
Good afternoon to your resource person. All well said concerning Nigeria's crude oil, but I need to give us recommendation pertaining to paradigm shift from the crude oil, because the world is moving away from crude oil. And he was advocating for income in place of, instead of oil subsidy. I bet you when equitable because of the poverty level in the north to the south. Don't forget that when gold was discovered in Zamfara, nobody, no other part of Nigeria knew about it until banditry set in, until kidnapping set in, because it was only that gold mining was meant for the northern oligarchy, that this thing was being mined and was not being added to the GDP of Nigeria. So where's the equity? Dr. Reuben, my resource person, good afternoon.
Well, Dr. Teriba, I hope you had that. She was raising questions about equity. In Zamfara State, gold mining was taking place. Nobody knew about it, but everybody is focusing on crude oil resources in the south. Shouldn't we be focusing on other things in Nigeria, particularly as the world is moving away from fossil fuels? And if we have these resources, she's talking about equity in resource management.
Very good. Which is in sync with the point we had made earlier, that crude oil came from one asset class. What other assets do we own as a country? And that question should be asked not just at the national level, but it should also be asked at the level of each state, each city, each community. What other assets do we have? And creates, a hatchery for the assets, where deals can be originated on them and consummated. Brazil, if you go to the Partnership for Investment site, is concessioning its forests to foreign investors as concession rail, as concession seaports, as concession power transmission. Everything is listed there. And at different paces, they are getting investment. Nigeria should move, stop talking about low-hanging fruits. Treat all assets as important and begin to attract investment into all the various assets. So I agree with the comment, that we neglected, our forests. That's why you have bandits there today. We neglected our city centers. That's why you have hoodlums hijacking them. And if you neglect your mines, you have miners. You can label them as illegal, But if there is no legal route into mining will happen, and then you say it's illegal. So if that's illegal, what's legal? How do you get? So it's a conversation that we have to get off the ground, and it's never too late, to get this conversation going. We hope we can convince those who are beginning to lose faith, who are saying they want to opt out. If there is not enough, people will opt out. But once they see that there will be enough for everybody, most people will drop the plan to opt out and they begin to opt in. Dr. Abati, hands are up. Abiodun Adeniyi and WMC Shitu.
Okay, except that we've almost run out of time, but let's quickly take Dr. Adeniyi. Dr. Adeniyi, please go ahead. Dr. Adeniyi? Dr. Adeniyi, please unmute your system. Okay, maybe Oluyemisi Shitu would like to go first. Well, I'm not getting any response from that end. Hello? Dr. Adeniyi.
Hello, good afternoon.
Okay, that's...
thank you, Dr. Abati.
Yes, please go ahead.
Thanks for this session with you. I just, my question all the time when we put all these arguments and propositions forward is that, is anybody listening at all? That's really, really my headache in Nigeria. I remember some maybe a year or a little more, ago, the president inaugurated the Economic Advisory Council. Beyond the inauguration, I don't think anybody has heard anything. When that council was put together, we were delighted because these were eggheads, and we thought they were going to bring a lot of good to the economic management of this country. But nothing is happening. We've not heard anything from them. We don't even know whether the president is conferring with them anymore. And we hold all these discussions, brilliant ideas are put forward. It's been said for the uptenth time that the CBN has no business in a lot of the things they are getting involved in. And you're just wondering, are we talking to the wall or something? That's really my question. Is anybody listening to us? And if they are listening, what is being done about all the ideas that are being suggested? Thank you again. God bless you.
Thank you very much for joining us, Oluyemisi Shitu. We'll just take two quick more comments, and then Dr. Teriba will wrap it up, and then we'll call it a day. Looks like we have a caller. Please, if you can make it very brief. We're running out of time. Hello? Okay, we lost that caller. Well, Dr. Adeniyi, are you ready? Dr. Abiodun Adeniyi. Okay, we'll take the caller on the line. Please be very brief. We're running out of time. We need to go quickly.
Hello, doctor.
Yes, thank you.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Moses from Isolom.
Please go ahead.
I was going to ask, Aramco and this company in Brazil, this Extravos now, their oil company, they became miracles of economy by virtue of unbundling. Do you advise that we also do that for NNPC, and will this work in our own case? Do you support that we unbundle the NNPC so that a company that possibly is worth nothing in the SY will suddenly be back there with rubber shoulders with the Aramcos of this world? Because Aramco, as I said, is a model that any country can follow the template. So do you support unbundling? That's my question for the doctor over there. Thank you.
Much. I'm sure Dr. Teriba had you. Looks like Dr. Adeniyi is now available. Dr. Adeniyi?
Yeah, Doc, if you can hear me, sir.
Yes,
I wanted to quickly ask the erudite Dr. Teriba, yes, he has made a brilliant distinction between means and end. What exactly are we missing as a nation in not getting our economics right?
Thank you very much, Dr. Adeniyi. Well, very quickly as you can make it, Dr. Teriba, two issues. Is anybody listening? Second one, the Aramco example. Should we also unbundle the NNPC, which, of course, is covered under the PIB, except that we're not moving fast enough with the PIB. And then the last intervention by Dr. Adeniyi, responding to the distinction you were trying to make between ends and means.
Right. Thank you very much for all the comments. Is anybody listening? She did mention the inauguration of the Council of Advisors, and I want to ask Reuben. She did say she saw the inauguration and she hasn't had anything. Have you invited any member of the Presidential Council to this program? Maybe it's time you did that, so that we also hear from them. They are friends, but public engagement is very important, particularly on the matter like the economy that affects everyone's lives. I do think that the Presidential Council should engage and present their ideas for scrutiny, before they table these things to the president. In particular, they should enjoy the benefit of the wisdom of others. We may be better at framing the questions, and they will be better at finding answers to it in their consultation with the president. NNPC subsidiaries, all corporate assets must be listed on the market. Any corporate asset that a country owns, whose value is not known, whose market value is not known, is of no use to that country. The world knows the value of your debt. The world needs to know the value of your assets. So from the very basic point of view of determining market value, all companies should be listed, including all the subsidiaries of NNPC, unless anybody has any reason why they are shying away from light, why you don't want the value of the company to be known. The means and ends, well, in a nutshell, is that Nigeria, it's a bit childish to be preoccupied with ends. It's better to spend more time on how to find the means with which to fulfill ends. We learned that from the primary school. You can't just say, I want to become a lawyer, I want to become a doctor, an architect, or economist, what have you. Your parents will advise you to go and read your primary school books first, read your secondary school books, and then get in the university to enroll. So what does Nigeria need to meet the needs of bringing inflation down, to need to grow? Let's concentrate on that. Nigeria needs to get global liquidity into local assets. And when you attract adequate level of liquidity into the country, like countries that were poorer than us, India, China, have done, then inflation will get out of our discussion, multiple exchange rates will get out of our discussion, and deficits, will get out of our discussion. Well, I wish Nigeria would. Thank you.
Well, on that note, we'd like to thank you very much, Dr. Ayo Teriba, for taking time out to discuss these very important issues with us today on City Talks with Reuben Abati. We'd also like to thank all our callers, all our listeners, and those who reach out to us on Zoom and Facebook and other social media platforms. Remember, the conversation does not end here. You can still reach out to me on my social media account, which is at Abati1990, and also on Instagram. And you can also reach out to at City1051 on all social media platforms. For those of you who tuned in late, no need to worry. You can visit our YouTube page, City1051, to watch the entire show. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button and leave comments. And don't forget also to tune in next week at noon for another exciting edition of City Talks. My name is Reuben Abati. The show was produced by Adedoja Allen, Abiodun Odunton, Ayodamola Oludara, Bello Akim, and Oluwaseun Adetitun. Have a great weekend, and thank you very much for listening. We'll see you again next week.
City Talks with Reuben Abati.